Hello and welcome to the Biocast with me, Toby, Kem, Andy and Rob. Today's topic will be climate change with an in-depth look at the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change Report 2014. Climate change is the large-scale shift in the planet's weather patterns and average temperatures which can lead to some pretty crazy weather. But today we'll be talking more specifically about the global carbon dioxide atmospheric rise in the mid to late 20th century, caused by the Industrial Revolution and anthropogenic human activity since.
Right. Who are the IPCC? They are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they were established in 1988. They are a scientific body who synthesise the most current climate findings worldwide by using current scientific, technical and socio-economic information. The IPCC is made up of 194 government representatives and produce a new piece of work every 5 to 7 years, which they then present to the governmental world leaders. The most recent studies published was in 2014. In order to be credible, the preparation of the reports has been regularly reviewed and improved over the years. To begin, a scoping meeting is held to develop the outline of the report, which is then approved by the IPCC governing body. Around 2,500 authors are then chosen by the government and the Bureau of the IPCC. The authors then produce a first draft, which is reviewed by experts, and then it's turned into a second draft, which is then further reviewed by government reviewers and experts. The circulation process of the peer review is very wide. In order to check the soundness of the scientific information, there are 3 levels of endorsement to this: approval, adoption, and acceptance.
Working Group 1 concludes that evidence that the climate is warming is unequivocal. They also conclude that radiative forcing, that is the amount of energy held in the atmosphere, is positive. Ocean warming dominates this increase in energy and accounts for 90% of the energy increase between 1971 and 2010. They also show that human influence in this is clear and that further emissions will also lead to further change. Lastly, they show that limiting this change will require substantial, sustained effort. So why are the IPCC telling people what they've already known for years? They're trying to estimate the amount of effort that it would take to mitigate the negative effects of climate change. They're trying to make such a comprehensive case for climate change that governments can't ignore it. So what are governments actually doing based on this report?
The examples I will be using are developed countries like USA and Norway, and Toby will be using examples of developing nations such as China and Bhutan.
Well, different countries are having different levels of success. We'll be basing our country comparisons on 2009 Kyoto Protocol carbon emission reduction pledges. Bhutan has been very successful as it has pledged to maintain its carbon neutrality. This is predicted to stay constant due to the constitutional mandate to maintain forest cover of at least 60%. The Bhutanese forestry sector is pivotal for this as its sequestration capacity currently exceeds emissions. China have pledged to reduce CO2 emissions by 40 to 45% per unit of GDP by 2020. Currently implemented policies predict this target will be met. However, while this may sound good, China is substantially above acceptable emission levels, giving it an unacceptable rating.
Norway are currently rated sufficient in their carbon reduction efforts, having pledged to reduce them by 30 to 40% from the 1990 levels by the year 2020. However, under current policy, Norway unfortunately will not be able to reach their targets that they have set. But compared to the Kyoto Protocol, they're doing comparatively well, which has targeted them to reduce the average emission by 16%. They also have further plans to reduce carbon emissions by 26% of the 2005 level by the year 2025. USA are currently rated inadequate at reducing their carbon emissions. The USA has only pledged to reduce carbon emissions by 2020 to 17% less than they were at 2005.
Whilst this may be a small portion of the countries aiming to reduce emissions, we wanted to represent different emission reduction efforts in relation to development levels.
And now we go over to Cemlyn and Barlow, who's going to speak about the UK's policy on climate change. Over to you, Cem.
The United Kingdom has been signed up to the Kyoto Protocol since 1995 to help reduce carbon emissions. The Climate Change Act of 2008 was passed by Ed Miliband, the then Secretary of Energy and Climate Change. The Climate Change Act of 2008 aims to reduce UK carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions by 80% in 2050 from 1990 levels. Part of the Climate Change Act 2008 calls for legally set budgets to help reduce carbon emissions over a 5-year period. Now, there are government incentives for new homes and homes that are being built that will help tackle the amount of carbon emissions emitted from these homes. The incentives include a Green Deal, which allows for homes to have solar panels and other renewable energy sources put on them, such as this one here, for a fee or a very tiny fee or no fee at all. Sometimes these solar panels are able to go into the feed-in tariff, which allows the homeowners to get some money for the energy that they produce. However, there has been some controversy about this over the years. Another incentive is that all homes built by 2016 will have to be level 6, that means carbon neutral. They're also looking into renewable heat incentives that will help reduce heat loss, therefore reducing the amount of carbon required to heat up a home.
Thanks for that, Cam. Now to see what can be done in the future.
The Cancun Agreements were a set of significant decisions by the international community to address the long-term challenge of climate change collectively. The estimated global emission levels made in the 2020 Cancun pledges are not consistent with cost-effective long-term mitigation trajectories. Meeting this goal would require further substantial reductions beyond 2020 to keep temperature change below 3 degrees relative to pre-industrial levels.
Here's an infographic based on information from the IPCC report. We can see different projections for atmospheric CO2 levels in the year 2100 based on how much global carbon emissions are reduced relative to those in 2010. The only one of these outcomes that stays below the target of 2 degrees global temperature change is the top one. As we can see, this would require possibly more than 100% decrease relative to current emissions. While this is not possible, the figures over 100% would require active removal of carbon from the atmosphere. 83% of global carbon is cycled through the oceans. Scientists are now looking towards the ocean for future sequestration and mitigation possibilities. These are known as blue carbon initiatives. Let's have a look at some research done in this area. Seagrass beds are sites of high carbon sequestration and can potentially support these blue carbon mitigation initiatives. The loss of these seagrass beds causes the erosion of historic carbon deposits, though revegetation of the beds can effectively restore sequestration capacity. It was concluded that restoration and conservation of these seagrass beds are effective strategies for climate change mitigation.
Another way in which marine systems play a role in sequestration is from sperm whales consuming prey at depth and then defecating in the photic zones, thus allowing iron to be used by primary producers, which will then act as a carbon sink when they die. Sperm whale numbers have been decimated over the last 100 years. However, their numbers are beginning to rise again due to the decline in whaling from nations around the world.
In a similar vein to seagrass beds, glass sponge reefs are also being looked at as an effective sequestration method. It has been shown that modern sponge reefs in the northeastern Pacific have been removing up to 227,000 kilograms of bacterial carbon daily. This is nearly an order of magnitude less than the 1,380,000 kilograms of bacterial carbon removed daily by reefs in the past. It's concluded that conservation and restoration of these past reefs, which used to cover the continental shelf, would also be an effective climate change mitigation strategy.
I guess that's all we've got time for today, folks. But from me, Toby, Andy and Rob, it is a goodbye. See you later.